Even though beans and grains have a rather gaseous reputation, they're good for us. Grains and legumes are one of the oldest known culinary pairings. They are high in fiber, protein, and essential nutrients, and low in fat. That and a few other facts inspired Julie Van Rosendaal and Sue Duncan to devote an entire cookbook to beans and grains. It is my pleasure to welcome TV host Julie Van Rosendaal and her best pal Sue Duncan to Studio 4 to tell us more. I say you're besties.
Yes, we
That's
are.
what the
That's what our bio
says. So I'm assuming you're still friends.
Absolutely. And a lot of people worried that writing a cookbook together might change that, but it didn't. We work great together.
Yeah.
How did you meet?
Junior high school. We were the two shyest kids in our class, so our teachers set us up so that we, could become. And apparently it stuck.
Yes.
Apparently it did, but what's so great is that two shy girls now get together to write a rather edgy cookbook on beans and grains.
And it's tough to be edgy when it comes to beans. It's about the unsexiest topic that.
No, they have a bad rep.
They do.
In some countries.
Well, and you see them in cuisines all around the world, and yet they're a huge Canadian crop. A lot of people don't realize that. There are a ton of pulses are grown in Canada, and they're good for the land. They're good for the farmers. They fix the nitrates in soil, so it's good for crop rotation. And a lot of people don't think of beans when they think of local food. So, so we want to, encourage people to eat more and, inform them that it is a Canadian crop.
And of course, they're great for us as well.
Well, that too.
Yes.
That's good. And there's so many kinds of beans. Do you have a favorite?
A
favorite bean?
favorite bean? I'm actually.
Or can you tell me?
It might make the others feel bad.
I was wondering.
Yeah. No, you know what, the different varieties are something a lot of people get hung up on, and they're mostly interchangeable. You can really use most beans where other beans would be happy. It's more of an aesthetic thing a lot of the time.
And I'm a bean lover, but I have never had beans in brownies.
Well,
I'm not saying it's not good.
Well, and black bean brownies have been around for a while, but we sort of expanded past the black bean brownies. We started pureeing white beans. We use canned white kidney beans because they puree really, really smoothly. A lot of people use applesauce as a replacement for fat in their muffins and their baking. But beans are so much more nutrient dense. They're packed with fiber. People are trying to eat more fiber and eat more whole grains, which is great, but beans have even more fiber than whole grains and protein as well. So by replacing some of the liquid in recipes with pureed white beans, we're kicking up the fiber and yet maintaining that sort of white bread dough, if it's in a pizza dough or a cinnamon bun or a pancake. A lot of people like white bread, and so we sort of came up with this way to make a nice white loaf or a white pizza crust that looks like white bread, that tastes like white bread, but actually has more fiber than if it was made with whole wheat flour. So it doesn't have that tweediness.
See, that's really interesting. Move over Wonder Bread.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here come the beans.
Exactly.
And kids wouldn't know the difference.
No,
they would never guess.
They can't tell.
Yeah. And I mean, and I like things that are grainy, but a lot of people don't. So there's a lot of ways we can work that in. Same thing with lentils, right? I mean, a lot of people just don't know what to do with lentil, and it's the soaking that intimidates people when it comes to dried beans. They don't realize they don't have to soak lentils. They can just throw them into a pot. And if you cook red lentils, they look and taste like oatmeal. So we put them in oatmeal cookies, we put them in muffins, we put them in scones.
Really? In scones?
In scones?
Excellent segue to this plate of scones that happens to be on the table.
And you're on the Tiffany Blue, too.
Well,
that's good. Maybe they'll give you a free bag.
There you go.
The next guest. Okay, so scones.
Yes.
I know we say scones or scones. Scones or scones. Yeah. You say scones. Some people say scones. I don't know. It has to be scones.
Potato, potato.
Potato, potato. Risotto.
Yes. I think they're all right.
We know what we're talking about.
Exactly. So tell me about the scones.
Well, in this recipe, Julie very cleverly found that if she cooks the red lentils first, which only takes about 15, maybe 20 minutes at the tops, and then you just add them in when you add the raisins in. Yeah. And you can't. There's no texture issue because a scone should be a little bit nubbly anyway. It's got some oatmeal in it already. And they just kind of slide right in. Yeah. Nobody's the wiser.
Slide right out.
And it's not about being so I'm glad you said that.
It does keep you regular. No, beans are good, and we're supposed to be regular. We'll live long, they tell me.
Most people need more fiber in their diets.
Absolutely.
Beans and lentils are one of the easiest ways to get more fiber into your diet.
Sure.
And inexpensive.
And they're delicious. That too.
That too.
I grew up on red beans and rice.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. And a lot of people say it's too expensive to eat healthfully. Beans and rice are pretty cheap. You can't get much cheaper
it's
than
true.
a can of beans or dried beans and grains.
Absolutely.
But when you can put beans in junk food, that's good.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
that-
shouldn't call
every
it
little,
junk
every
food.
little bit helps.
But you know
though.
what I mean. Have a
Yeah.
brownie, it's got beans in it.
Well,
Good for you.
yeah, and I think a lot of the recipes in the book, they're just, you know, and it's not necessarily that we're specifically trying to be sneaky. You know, we often put things in baking and pancakes that, like, we'll put some flax meal in pancakes. And you don't have to bring them to the table saying, these pancakes have flax
No,
meal
you
in
never
them.
mention that.
No.
Don't mention the
And,
beans.
you know, it's not that you have to
Right.
hide it, but at the same time, especially for younger kids or,
Sure.
you know, some
Husbands.
people, and husbands,
Husbands.
parents.
Parents.
Ourselves.
Yes.
Well, because some people say, you know, I can't do beans. Guess what
Yeah.
happens?
Yeah.
But I find if you eat a lot of beans or you introduce them gradually, that doesn't happen.
Absolutely.
much.
Your system does adapt.
Yeah.
And especially when you have small amounts more frequently, then your system will adapt to it. You can't just do a 180-degree turn on your
Right.
diet and
No,
not
I
have a
wouldn't
few.
suggest you go
Yeah.
from a bean-free diet to
7 minutes.
beanorama.
All beans all the time.
All beans all the time.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
Well, and
but
getting rid of-
salt them in.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
beans, the musical fruit. The more you eat, the less you toot.
The more you eat, the less you do. Really?
And if you drain the sludge off canned beans, or if you get rid of the cooking liquid, that gets rid of a lot
Okay.
of the issue.
I've heard the issue. We just can't say it, can we?
Yes.
But so when you are taking a hard bean,
Yes.
a garbanzo, a red bean, a white bean, any bean, and soaking it, what's the trick?
There's not much trick, actually. It's a lot easier than most people realize. Julie and I actually did an experiment where we, on the same stove, in separate pots, we cooked one pot with dry beans and the other one that had been soaked overnight. And the dry beans took about a half an hour of extra cooking time to catch
Right.
up to the ones that had been soaked overnight. Now, soaking them also does, it helps make them more digestible. It helps get rid of, you know, some of
Gaseous.
those gaseous side effects.
Right. Soaking overnight.
It does, and then draining that water. But there's really not a lot of technique to it. You can, if you have some time, by all means soak the beans, or you can quick soak them, which just means you bring it to a boil and let it sit for about an hour and then proceed.
That makes sense because people are in a
Yeah.
hurry these days. So you
Yeah.
you bring them to a boil, let them
let 'em
soak
sit.
an hour. What about the white froth on the top? Do you skim the white froth when they're?
Just skim it
Am I
off.
doing something wrong because I get
No, they
white froth
foam.
on the
No, they
beans?
always
The
do.
foam?
Yeah, no, they do. That's right. And one thing you can do, it's funny because in most countries where they cook a lot of beans and lentils, they don't even have elaborate kitchens, you know. And we have all these culinary advantages, and yet the thought of soaking a bean is intimidating. So what we like to do is soak and cook a big batch of beans just on a regular basis and freeze them because they freeze really well. So then you can just take a bag of beans out of the freezer. You can freeze them in the cooking liquid just to protect them from
I
freezer
didn't
burn.
know they
and,
froze really
and
well.
then they're ready to go. So if you're not planning ahead and you haven't, you know, pre-soaked your beans, or open a can. There's no shame in canned beans.
Well, you know, we always have a little guilt about that.
Yeah.
And there is a texture, well, I find
Certainly.
there's just a little bit of a texture difference. If you make
Yeah.
chili with beans from scratch, it just has a little bit of
More
Yeah.
tooth.
more tooth,
Yeah,
and I
very
like
well
that.
Yeah.
It comes down to personal preference.
Okay.
That nutritionally, you're as fine with one as you are with the other. One of the concerns some people have with canned beans is that there's a little more sodium in them. But if you rinse them well, drain them, rinse them well, you get rid of about 40% of the sodium in the can. And then the other thing too is that there's not much that you put a bean in that you wouldn't be using a bit of salt anyway.
Yeah.
Well, true.
So,
So you sneak white beans into mashed potatoes.
yes, ma'am.
We do.
See, why would you have to do beans from scratch to sneak them into mashed potatoes? Doesn't make sense.
Exactly. Yeah. So sometimes the canned beans we can use that slightly softer texture to our advantage when we want to puree,
Sure.
we want a really
Mash
smooth
them, yeah.
texture. Then they're a little bit closer in the first place. It can go just a little easier.
Secret to beans and soup, lentil soup, bean soup, navy bean soup, lima bean soup, doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. And like Sue said, people get hung up on the type of bean. I mean, you go to the store and you'll see bins of dried beans, and sometimes they're labeled, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they have a name that it might be different from at another store.
Right,
So, you know, mix and match them. Obviously, things like chickpeas have a bit of a different texture. Lentils don't need to be soaked, and especially red lentils, which are split, cook even more quickly than the little brown or green or blue lentils, but you can throw them right into your soup. And they cook in the same length of time as whole grains like brown rice or barley. So if you want to cook some barley and lentils, you can throw them in a pot together, drain them, and they make a great base for a salad or, you know, in addition to soup or all kinds of things. Yeah.
What about those wheat berries?
Oh, love wheat berries, yeah.
What do you do with those?
You soak them and cook them.
Obviously.
Yeah,
Or break
like any
your
other
tooth.
grain.
Yes.
Or break your tooth. Yeah. Soak them first. It's just similar to cooking a bean. And when we're cooking with beans, the time sort of is dependent on how old the bean is, which is often hard to tell. So there's a big window, of cooking time. Just cook them until they're done. Don't get hung up on. It's really hard to overcook a dried bean. You really have to cook it for a long time. Yeah. And don't salt the water as they're cooking. They tend to get sort of a gritty texture.
And if you mush it, then you make a hummus or something, or
Absolutely.
Totally.
smash around.
Make a dip.
Or in a lot of soups too, you actually deliberately bash up the beans a little bit, and then they provide a little bit of a thickener.
Sure.
So like a black bean soup.
And the black bean brownies, did we talk about those?
No,
We
but
mentioned
Sue
that you
has
make them.
mastered. Sue's mastered the black bean brownie. I gave up years ago on black bean brownies, but she brought them back.
And undetectable.
Yeah, no,
Undetectable.
The trick is you still need to use really good chocolate.
Yeah.
The normal brownie
dark.
rules still apply.
Okay.
And then the biggest thing I found is that when you're baking with beans, sometimes that extra moisture can be a problem. Because we don't usually have any liquid in a brownie beyond just an egg or that sort of thing.
Right.
But if you kind of blot the black beans before you mix them up, then it just helps get rid of some of the extra moisture, which
makes them cakier instead of that dense chewiness that you want in a brownie.
Yeah, and they're low fat too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Aren't they most beans low fat?
Oh, beans are very low fat.
Yeah.
Yes.
High in fiber, high in protein. I mean, they're like the world's most perfect food. And the ultimate convenience food. And they've passed the 6-year-old boy test, these brownies.
Well, and you have one, don't you?
I do, yes.
You have a son.
Yeah. And so has a daughter.
So and you have a daughter.
I
so
do,
the kids, your kids, have no idea probably.
Well, our neighbors either.
Or the
Keep
neighbors.
pawning off. Well, now when I go somewhere with a cake or a pie, people say, "Are there beans in this?" Well, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, let's wait and see.
Yeah, exactly. You tell me tomorrow.
Of course. But you have a pumpkin chocolate chip
Loaf,
cake that has red lentils in there, right?
And pumpkin pie. When you're making pumpkin pie for Christmas, you can puree the red lentils right into the pumpkin filling, and
it adds the fiber. It adds the edge. You don't have to tell. It can be your secret. And why don't we tell? Because as you suggest, beans, one of the perfect foods.
Absolutely.
We're trying to wean ourselves off too much meat, too much fat, gluten, all of that.
Yeah, and absolutely. Tell people who might be interested, but some people are turned off by the idea of a dessert with a bean in it. So
Right. Again,
just keep it your own little
secret code.
Yeah, and there are not a lot of allergies to beans either. We found, or legumes, very few. I mean, it doesn't happen as often as other foods.
And you even have a recipe for oatmeal in here.
Oh. Sue's brilliant. She, seriously.
That's why you're best friends.
That's right.
Yeah, but she cooks a little bit of red lentils in with her breakfast, or with her morning oatmeal. Yeah. And that just boosts the fiber and the protein in her. I mean, everyone's looking for high fiber, high protein breakfast.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
The
red lentils that
red lentils.
I bet you cook them the night before, don't you?
No, they just need a few extra minutes.
I just start them ahead of time. The trick is not to try to get too many in there, because if you have about 50-50 oatmeal and red lentils, they kind of turn gluey. But if you just put about a tablespoon of red lentils, and I cook them, while I'm making my coffee, and then just add the oatmeal when the red lentils.
Great, steel cut oats, or it doesn't matter.
Doesn't
Any
matter.
kind.
Yeah, I use old-fashioned a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to try that.
And beans have no flavor on their own, so they can slip into all kinds of things.
Well, who knew?
Yeah.
No truffle oil or anything. No, why bother? Yeah. So, are you still doing the show? Television?
It was all taped, so it's in reruns. I'm still on TV, but I'm not. I do a lot of stuff in Calgary, but.
And writing cookbooks. Grazing, you wrote Grazing.
Yeah,
There was one called Starting Out.
Yeah.
One Smart Cookie. Yeah. And you're living where?
I actually live at Silver Star Mountain, just outside Vernon, BC.
So you ski a bit, do you?
I do what I can.
Walk out the door, put your skis on?
Just about, yeah.
Like that.
Just go down my driveway. It's actually very
And give bean brownies to the neighbors and everybody's happy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, how nice to meet you.
It's great to meet you too.
It was nice to meet you.
Thank you. Spilling the beans, cooking and baking with beans and grains every day. Julie Van Rosendaal and Sue Duncan.